Hello, everybody, and welcome to MAD Security's Maritime Town Hall series. My objective is to present timely and relevant topics in maritime cyber and discuss these topics with the technical, logistical, and yes, even political considerations around them. A good maritime phrase is a rising tide raises all boats, and with this series, I'm hoping to contribute to that rising tide in a meaningful, collaborative way. So today we're going to talk about practical, affordable steps you can take right now to comply with the Coast Guard's final rule and become more secure. These aren't big budget items. These are smart, strategic actions that will dramatically reduce risk and help you show inspectors meaningful progress. A little bit about me. For those who don't know me, I'm a retired Coast Guard officer. I've been doing this for about 30 years. Everything from Coast Guard Cyber Command to the White House. I've been at MAD Security since 2013. In that time, I've worked with cruise lines, shipping companies, MARAD, Coast Guard, all kinds of ports and port partners. And the bottom line is that I'm old. I have a lot of experience doing this, and I'm always excited to talk to people about it, share my experiences, and then make things better for the maritime community. So to level set, the Coast Guard's final rule went into effect on July 16th of this year. Inspections will be increasing through 2026, and the Coast Guard will be ramping up on their inspection efforts, and it'll be a crawl, walk, run process. The good news is that many of the high-value compliance steps require very little investment, and quick wins are going to allow you to show inspectors progress and reduce your cyber risk today, while also avoiding overcommitting to technology before you've tightened your foundation down. What we'll cover today is reducing scope, which is the most cost-saving lever under the new rule. Then we'll walk through quick identity and MFA wins, high-value policies, basic detection steps, and incident response essentials. We'll wrap up with a practical 30-day roadmap you can execute starting tomorrow. The goal is for you to walk away knowing exactly where to focus to create measurable compliance progress. Let's start with the most strategic concept in the entire final rule, and that's scope reduction. The Coast Guard only regulates systems that directly support MTSA security functions. That means if you can segment or isolate systems so they're no longer in that category, they will no longer require the full suite of cybersecurity controls. Reducing scope reduces costs, reduces complexity, and reduces monitoring needs. It also reduces your exposure during audits, which is a critical piece. Similar to how the Department of Defense does the cybersecurity maturity model certification, minimizing scope and understanding your scope is a vital first step. You absolutely do not want everything in your enterprise to be in scope. That's a losing and very expensive way of going about it. Network segmentation doesn't have to be a massive engineering effort. Even basic VLANs, access control lists, or firewall rules can dramatically reduce risk. Segmentation comes up over and over again in the Coast Guard's final rule, and for good reason. When cameras, badge readers, gates, and vendor remote sessions sit in the same flat network as OT systems, you've unintentionally expanded your regulated footprint. By carving the network into a few logistical, logical zones, you create air gaps or digital fire breaks that help prevent intruders from freely moving between your systems. This not only reduces scope, it also lowers incident impact if something goes wrong, similar to how you have compartments on board a ship to stop progressive flooding from happening. One of the biggest misconceptions is that you need an expensive OT visibility platform before you can document your environment. That's just not true. A simple asset list pulled from procurement records, existing diagrams, or even a physical walkthrough, and we do physical walkthroughs all the time on vessels and in terminals. A basic network map with the inventory is plenty for Coast Guard expectations. This shows you understand what's critical, what you have in your environment, what things are connected, and what needs to be protected. It also forms the foundation for smart segmentation and policy writing later. CIS 18 is an interesting framework in that it has 18 different functions. The first two are what is an inventory of what's on your network and what is an inventory of your software. I frequently tell people that if you don't know those two things, stop, because the other 16 elements of the CIS 18 simply don't matter at that point. If you don't know what you have on your system, stop, figure out what you have on your system, and then work forward. Identity is where attackers strike first, and unfortunately, it's also where many MTSA facilities are most exposed. The Coast Guard's come out multiple times, including just yesterday, November 18th, with a multi-factor authentication bullet. And the good news is that improving identity hygiene is almost entirely free. It usually doesn't cost very much. You don't need enterprise IAM suites or zero trust deployments necessarily to meet Coast Guard expectations. You should adhere to zero trust methods and tenets where possible, but you don't need anything super complicated or expensive to get there. What you need is consistent control over who has access, where they have access, and whether those accounts are still valid. The Coast Guard talks about going into some of these places, and we've seen in many of these MTSA-regulated facilities where they have contractor accounts from years previous that are just sitting there. It doesn't cost anything to go through and do a quarterly cleanup and get rid of those accounts, which are just access points for potential nefarious activity. So a lot of these things, as I mentioned, they don't require a lot of money, don't require a lot of time, just a little bit of discipline and diligence. Multi-factor authentication remains one of the strongest protections against credential theft and remote attack. It's also easy to overspend or to over-implement as well. Focus your multi-factor authentication on your highest risk vectors first. Remote access, admin accounts, and any cloud-based systems that process sensitive or operational data. Most MTSA environments already have Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, and both provide built-in multi-factor authentication at no additional cost. By targeting MFA where it truly matters, you maximize protection while minimizing disruption to operations. In many cases, some of the OT systems don't provide an opportunity to do multi-factor authentication. In that case, compensating controls and physical security carries the day. But where those OT systems do enable multi-factor authentication as an option, you should always use those. And I would argue that MFA takes out an overwhelming majority of threat actors who utilize phishing emails to harvest credentials. And even though you can, in some cases, bypass multi-factor authentication, and we've seen sophisticated adversaries be able to bypass that or infiltrate your secondary factor, whether that's your phone or whatever, it makes you a hard target if they have to do that. It's much harder to do that. And multi-factor is just still one of the biggest things that you can do to make yourself safe and secure, and one of the biggest things that the auditors always look for. Next, we're going to talk about account hygiene. And one of the things I say is that it's usually the dumb stuff that gets you. Even when you look at Stuxnet and the impact that it had on Iranian centrifuges, as beautiful as that malware was developed, it still goes nowhere if somebody doesn't plug in a thumb drive that shouldn't have been plugged into the system. So I'm always going to foot stomp account hygiene, and that's something that the Coast Guard always foot stomps as well, and something that comes out loud and clear in SOC-as-a bulletins and Coast Guard bulletins. Disable unused accounts, remove former contractors, enforce least privilege, right? We still go into places where we see that everyone has local admin because it's easier, right? And so when we see this where every single person in an enterprise has administrative accounts or administrative privileges in their user accounts, that's incredibly bad. And even administrators should be not using their administrative accounts, should be using a separate user account in their day-to-day activities. So the less that you're using those administrative privileges, the less likely you are to trigger malware and to install something that's going to be a permanent issue on your network. This is actually one of the quickest, easiest, cheapest wins of the entire compliance process. The next quick win is smart policies. The new rule is very heavy on governance, and trust me when I say that the Coast Guard doesn't have the time or the resources to go through and look at your technical implementations and to review whether or not you're scanning the right systems. Where you're going to get a lot of bang for very little buck is having clear roles, defined responsibilities, and documented processes. Policies bring structure to your cybersecurity program, and they also make inspections dramatically easier. If you hand an inspector a clean set of documents that show who's responsible, what systems are critical, what your strategy is, and how protective measures are applied, you're going to be way ahead of the game. Policies cost almost nothing to create, just time, which is a resource, of course, but they deliver massive value when inspectors review your compliance posture. And normally, when I do auditing, because I've been in an auditing role for a lot of my career, you can tell by these policies and plans how well the organization is postured for cybersecurity. Usually within 5 minutes, you can tell how things are going to go based upon how these policies are set up and what is in them. And that's why it's important to have experts to help with those strategies right off the bat and how you're going to attack these problems. Because a little bit of effort and a little bit of resource application at the very beginning of the process is going to save you massive amounts of time and energy later on in the process. Vendor access is something that is huge within the maritime environment, and third parties introduce some of the greatest risks for us. Whether it's integrators connecting remotely, maintenance contractors, or system vendors, you need clear rules governing what they can access and how they can authenticate. Adding cyber requirements to vendor contracts doesn't cost anything and holds partners accountable. The procurement elements of your organization do need to be involved in these in your cyber program. Requiring unique credentials eliminates a major blind spot in audit trails. And these simple measures can dramatically improve your defensibility if a cybersecurity incident occurs. What we're seeing is that increasingly some of these manufacturers are doing over-the-air patches, over-the-air types of situations. So air gapping isn't always going to be an option for you. Air gapping is a great option to have when you can exercise it. But in some cases, these manufacturers are going with a faster, easier solution for them. And you have to make sure to evaluate exactly what the need is, what the risk is versus giving them the access versus the risk of not giving them the access, and how those systems and how different ways of patching and accounting for your systems is going to play out. So sometimes you're going to end up with competing risks. And the bottom line is you have to think about those, carefully consider them, and be able to articulate why you made the decision that you made. The next quick win is using a SOC as a service, not doing yourself. And I don't know how many times I have this conversation with people that want to build their own SOC. Building your own SOC is very expensive and very hard. And in almost all cases, outsourcing makes far more sense. The Coast Guard is going to expect you to detect suspicious activity. The problem is that these activities, these threat actors, don't operate from 8 to 5 p.m. Central Time. They operate around the clock. They operate weekends, nights. And so, building your own SOC and trying to do that 24/7 coverage will require 6 to 8 people minimum to continually monitor that. In addition to that, you have to manage the people, manage the turnover, manage their training, manage their education, manage the network and the system. By that point in time, you're looking at millions of dollars to stand up your own SOC, between licensing costs, between your people, between the management of it. And we've seen very large organizations start down this path and then come to the realization that this just isn't feasible. And as a maritime company, you're probably never going to be able to build as good of a security operations center as a company that's their whole entire focus. Some of the things you can do to get minimum wins, even without a SOC or SOC as a service, is enabling your Windows logs, turning on your firewall logging, and doing basic OT device logging if available. Even if it's a lightweight elastic instance or something like that, that allows you to investigate incidents and show inspectors you have foundational visibility. One of the things that we've encountered on several occasions is people who have been breached, and they come to us and say, hey, can you figure out what happened, right? Can you do this incident response and figure out what happened? And if the logs aren't there for us to review, there really isn't anything we can do. We can go through and do the forensics as far as what maybe find out how it happened, but it makes it much, much more difficult. And so having a SOC as a service, which is normally a less than the cost of one or two people, and includes all of your licensing fees and everything else, is going to make sure that all your logs are in place and that you can do those forensics and the autopsy if something has occurred. And also, the other thing is to find your advanced persistent threats. Because just because you're logging things doesn't mean that you have the tools and the capability to find things like Volt Typhoon. And how does something like Volt Typhoon happen with 4 years of dwell time in some cases? It's because nobody was going through the logs looking for anomalous activity, actually doing threat hunting to find them. So that's quick win number 4. Incident response is one of the clearest components of the final rule. You must have an incident response plan. You must know who calls who when a bad day happens, and you must be able to report certain incidents to the Coast Guard within 24 hours. This doesn't require a complicated response playbook. What matters is clarity, clear roles, clear criteria, clear communication channels, knowing and assigning individuals to what those responsibilities are and exercising them doesn't require any money. It's just a matter of, again, discipline and going through the process and having somebody that can lead through the exercises to help you with these, with establishing and retaining a smart plan for resilience. You simply cannot stop a determined resourced adversary from getting into your systems. It's almost impossible. A nation state that really wants into your specific system and has nearly unlimited resources will get in. So the focus should be on resilience. And the Coast Guard recognizes that as well. The Coast Guard's final rule isn't so much about cybersecurity as it is cyber safety, right? Which is a subcomponent of the big cybersecurity thing. So knowing how you're going to respond and how you're going to be resilient and continue operations to make sure that you don't have loss of life, loss of massive property, those types of things is going to be the key. Another thing is having an IR expert on retainer. The time to find an incident response expert isn't during the incident. If you have somebody in place that knows your system, knows how you operate, and can come in and be part of your team in resolving these incidents, that's key. And a lot of organizations will even offer minimum or no cost IR retainers. So again, this isn't a massive big ticket item to have an incident responder on retainer to be able to help you if something happens. Quick win number 6 is that physical security. In almost every maritime environment, physical access is a cyber vulnerability. We've seen core switches in unlocked closets, servers sitting under desks, passwords posted on post-it notes, networking cabinets accessible to anyone walking the pier. These issues are inexpensive to fix with locks, signage, or relocating the equipment to smart areas. So adding segmentation for cameras and access system also prevents attackers from exploiting weak legacy devices. Improving physical security is one of the easiest and most overlooked quick wins. So that should be one of your focus areas of effort as well. So let's talk about 30-day quick wins plan for a motivated organization that really wants to get a jump start, right? We all know that the training requirement is January 12th, and you're going to have all your training in place. We're in November right now, so if you haven't already done that, which is also usually a fairly non-expensive thing to do and implement, then you're going to need a partner on that yesterday. But moving forward, as far as your actual cybersecurity plan, as far as your network and your environment physically and cyber-wise, week 1, identify your scope, find out your networks, map them, understand your critical systems. In week 2, you're going to clean up your identity and deploy multi-factor authentication to the highest risk accounts. Week 3, you're going to focus on foundational policies that support governance. And in this effort, I would say, find an expert who's done this before, who really knows what they're doing. Frequently, your IT staff hasn't been through this before. They may understand technically how things go, but they may not have experience with auditing, with cybersecurity, with kind of strategic way of how you can, from a business perspective, do things a smart way. So throughout these, as you do your policies, your access control, your IR plan, getting help on those is going to be critical. And then week 4, you're going to turn on basic logging, test your incident response process, and by the end of the month, you've dramatically improved your compliance posture and created a defensible plan that inspectors will respect. And I think that those types of things are things that the Coast Guard's looking for. They're looking for you to be moving the needle forward, to have a good story, to be able to tell them, hey, here's what we've done, here's what we have in place, here's our plan for moving ahead. And I think that that's really what the Coast Guard's going to be looking for. So by the end of the 30 days, you should have a defensible security posture, lower inspection risk, documented progress with policies, reduce scope, means reduce cost, and clear momentum towards full compliance. As an accelerator, and I've talked about this several times before, find a trusted partner. Find somebody who's been working in the field for a long time. Just even a couple of hours of their time can be invaluable for how you set your strategy and how you figure out what your scope is. So, Mad Security, we've been doing this for over a decade in the company, and we operate a dedicated maritime SOC. We support compliance efforts nationwide and help organizations build programs. So feel free to reach out to me at any point if you have any questions. Happy to have that initial conversation and follow-on conversations. As you can tell, I'm always passionate about this, so always love talking about it. But finding a trusted partner, not trying to do everything in-house. Most people simply don't have the resources to do that anyways. It is going to be a good way to go, and the sooner you do that, the better. And with that, I will open it up to any questions. I got a couple that folks had asked. The January 12th timeline for training. Yes. So by January 12th, every person within your enterprise that processes IT or OT or has access to those systems has to have training. And that can be problematic because in some cases, some of these folks that have access, they might be union workers that don't even have a computer account. So how do you get the training to them? Well, sometimes you can do a presentation. You can print out slides that allow them to go through and go through the training in a binder and attest that they've gone through those and asked any questions that they have. But I think that that's going to be one of the clearest things that the Coast Guard can do. It doesn't require a whole lot of technical acumen to review logs of who's done training and who hasn't done training. So that's one of those ones where not only is it a quick one, but it's also an easy one for the auditors to get their arms around. So several ways of doing that. If you need training, please feel free to reach out. We do some CISO training with partners, and we have good partners that also have this automated training and things like that will get you to compliance. But really that needs to be done as soon as possible with the January 12th deadline looming. Let's see. Maritime SOC. So do you have to monitor your OT systems? So in some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. I would say it depends. We're increasingly seeing the IT and OT world come together. And, it used to be that you could air gap all of your systems and focus only on your IT systems. What we're seeing is that more and more frequently, and I'd mentioned during the vendor access slide that over-the-air updates are becoming more and more prevalent. If that's the case and you can't just rely on physical security and you have external connections, then you really should be monitoring those systems. Besides the fact that those are systems that are going to be the most impactful to your safety. Whether or not your proprietary information gets released, even PII, generally speaking, that's not within the realm of what the Coast Guard is going to care about. That's not their domain. Their domain is protection of the maritime transportation system. And so those OT systems kind of are foundational, and the protection of those is foundational. And so I think that more and more there's going to be a need for monitoring of OT systems as they become just more and more integrated with remote work. CISO. So, okay, yeah. So CISOs are required to be designated in writing by 2027. To me, that's too far out. You have all of these deliverables that have to be done by 2027 as well, your facility security assessment, things like that. How are you going to plan your policies, conduct your assessment? How are you going to do all those activities without having a designated CISO first? And when I do my webinar on the 8 steps to build a foundational cybersecurity program, step 1 is designate somebody who's accountable in writing, who's individually responsible, accountable, and empowered to be able to carry out your cybersecurity program. And the CISO is that. And I was really happy to see the Coast Guard do that as a critical first step. And I think the Coast Guard is going to be leaning very heavily on these CISOs. And I think that they're also going to be providing some good education to those folks that are designated as CISOs. That's one of the things the Coast Guard's been really good at, is putting out bulletins and lessons learned from their cyber protection team, assessments and things like that. So finding an individual to be your CISO is something that you should be doing immediately. And you can find a third party to do that for you. You can find somebody, if you're a small organization that can't afford a full person to do that, find somebody that can help with that as a third party. That's an affordable way of doing it. Again, a quick win as opposed to going and investing in a whole bunch of people. Outsource it to an expert, just like you might your lawyer, right? A lot of organizations can't afford a full-time lawyer. They have lawyers on retainer. They have lawyers that do things for them as needed. I think that's it. Is there any more questions? All right. Well, I thank you all for your attention, and I hope you have a great day. Please feel free to reach out. Cliff@madsecurity.com is the easiest way to hit me. And we look forward to working with you and making our maritime transportation sector cyber safe. Thanks and have a great day.